Everybody, I'll explain this in a minute. I just wanted to show you this to make sure that this is not a joke. This is real. This postcard thing is real. I got it in the mail, and we'll be looking at this in more detail. I'm recording the other video actually as I do this, but just because I think otherwise people would have trouble believing in this. It's so asinine. So people are probably wondering, Argent, what the hell is that? Why is there random live cam footage? Why were you filming a postcard? And it's true, it's kind of hard to even grasp the magnitude of how retarded this is going to be, but we'll try. So this is a topic I had initially not really wanted to talk about because it's not terribly interesting to me. But the whole thing has just spiraled into being such a dumpster fire. I've kind of retroactively gone back and started to take a look at it and unravel this mess. Probably the most interesting part of this is just how much of a tool Justin Trudeau is. So, basically Justin Trudeau, when he got elected, one of the things he was spouting when he was just rambling on, promising everything, is he said this will be the last election under first past the post. We're not going to have another election under it. For those of you who don't know, first past the post is what we use in Britain, America, and Canada. Excuse me. And it's the idea that you have a district, a member of parliament or a congressman or whatever represents the district, and everyone in the district votes, and whatever candidate gets the most votes wins. Pretty simple. It's pretty much the easiest form of electoral system, and it favors parties that can get a plurality of the vote, and it generally almost always leads to majority governments. That is, a party controlling more than half of whatever the parliament or House of Representatives is. Makes sense. As opposed to proportional governments where proportional systems where parties get a number of seats equal to their percent of the popular vote. Under such a system, you don't have a local representative, which creates issues. But more kind of importantly, it leads to there always being coalition governments. So for Americans, because like 90% of my viewer base is American, imagine that the Green Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, the Democratic Party, and the Socialist Party were all part of a coalition. Imagine how horrible that would be. Because basically every party that's part of the coalition, even if they're really small, demands a lot. Because they'll be like, okay, well, we only have 1 or 2 seats, but you won't be able to form a government at all, so gives me that. In Israel, it's not uncommon to have 5 or 6 party coalitions. And under 5 or 6 party coalitions, every party will demand multiple cabinet seats. So in Israel, they'll have multiple of what they call minister without portfolio, which is like, let's just say that there was like 10 secretaries in the U.S. government who didn't have a portfolio. They were just called secretary, and they didn't govern any particular area, but they got a full secretary salary and their own staff. That's basically what happens. But, so they want to change the first past the post because it's kind of the new left-wing thing is it has to represent the will of the people. So every vote has to count because not every vote counts under this system. So once we get into this, there's a lot of politics behind it because there's different electoral systems. And each electoral system favors a different party. Now, the Conservative Party does best under first past the post because it is possible for it to get a plurality of the vote. Particularly if the Tories can pick up a couple points in Ontario, maybe 1 or 2 in Quebec, and sweep the West, they can win a majority government. Ontario and BC are very much battleground provinces, and a shift of a couple points can yield dozens of seats. So they do okay under the current system. The NDP, our kind of third party, our Socialist Party, wants proportional. Because they get a sizable percent of the vote, between 15 and 25, depending on the election. But because they're a third party, they don't get very many seats. They might get 20% of the vote, but get like 5% of the seats. So they benefit the most from proportional. Then we have the Liberal Party, which wants ranked choice. For those of you who don't know what ranked choice is, I'll try to explain it. It's really complicated. Basically, you're given a ballot, and you have to rank all the names on the ballot. So my ballot would probably be Conservative Party would be number one. Then it would probably be Christian Heritage if they're running. Then it would probably be, I would put NDP before Liberal. So mine would go Conservative, NDP, Liberal. And then someone else's might go Liberal, NDP, Conservative, or Liberal, Conservative, NDP. So what happens is if no candidate gets a majority of the vote, which doesn't happen under multi-party systems, except in very rare cases, the person with the lowest percent of the vote is eliminated, and their votes are redistributed to the next choice. So in my case, if the Conservative didn't get it, if the Conservative had the lowest of the three candidates, he would be eliminated, and my vote would go to the NDP candidate. And then they keep doing that until one person has a majority. Now, there's a lot of issues with this. One of the issues is they might be like me and they'd put Conservative NDP, but they would not put Liberal down. So my ballot would just not count. It would not help to elect the final person. It would not be in the final running. But why I'm even talking about this is the Liberal Party is everyone's second choice because they're theoretically kind of a centrist party. For those of you who don't know, the Liberal Party is kind of far left socially and kind of centrist to center left economically. The NDP is ironically used to be kind of like center left socially and left wing like socialist economically, but that's neither here nor there. As kind of Canada's basically centrist party, all the NDP and most of the Conservatives will put Liberal as their second choice. I think more Conservatives would put NDP as their second choice than NDP would put Conservatives as their second choice, because there is actually some overlap, particularly in the rural areas. But basically, the system strongly would favor the Liberals. Pretty much all the other parties would put Liberals as their second choice. It would always have eliminations because it's a three-plus party system. And the Liberals would basically win every election from now until the end of time. So that's what they want to implement. The NDP is against that because they'd never win another seat, and the Conservatives are against it even though they'd be less devastated than the NDP. So this led to the whole consultation process. Sorry, this is going to be a long video. There's a lot of bullshit to cover. So the consultation process was held, and basically MPs across Canada were expected to have... So Trudeau set up the Commission for Electoral Reform, who was going to investigate this issue, and the commission was going to investigate it. They were going to recommend an electoral system. Now, this is obviously probably a scam, because I'm sure Trudeau is just going to force through whatever he wants. But they set this up, they brought in a bunch of people, they had hearings, etc. I was following it a little. What system Canada would actually use isn't like that interesting. But as a political scientist, I'm interested in electoral systems. It's kind of an interesting procedural topic. But yeah, so they brought these people in, they were having that. So they decided to have consultations across Canada. So they're having consultations across Canada, and each MP is expected to conduct one in their riding. That is, they go to they rent some place, like at a local church or at their office or whatever, and they people from their district can come and give their say. Now, the issue with this was it wasn't advertised. In some cases, because people were documenting this because it was just a massive disaster. And I think it really shows the way the left functions. Is they had things where like Liberal MPs were posting on their Twitter half an hour before it would happen. They were not posting it on like the government's website where they were supposed to be listed. And like I saw some articles where it said there like 12 people showed up, and that was like touted like they're like 12 people showed up and the majority of them supported proportional. And you have to understand, an electoral district in Canada is I think 80 to 120,000 people depending on the province. Actually, PEI it's a lot less, but it's normally about 80 to 100,000 people. So in a district of 80 to 100,000 people, 12 showed up because it wasn't advertised and no one really cares about the issue anyways. And they use that as being representative of the people. Or like, well, everyone else should have showed up. I'm like, well, they weren't even given a choice to show up. I don't even know if they had one in my district. That's how poorly advertised this whole thing was. They might have. I don't really know. And Justin Trudeau had one in his district, and only 10 people came, and they were all corporate executives. So the man of the people didn't let the common people have their say, and he presented what they said to him as being representative of the Canadian population. So if we were to extrapolate, probably like a couple thousand people across the country actually took part in these. And from my understanding, I didn't go to one. I didn't really hear anything about it. I think they just basically told the people, first past the post sucks, it's racist, somehow. You've got to go with ranked choice. So they're like, well, out of the 6,000 people who participated in this, Canadians got to have their say, and that means we have to change the electoral system. So what wound up happening is the Electoral Commission took all the testimony, took their own debate, and the Conservatives and NDP agreed. They said, look, there's not a clear mandate to change. Most of the Canadian people we talked to were like, I guess proportionate sounds good. Like, not even really proportionate sounds good, but yeah, every vote should count. A party's seats should somewhat reflect the number of votes they get. And they just kind of... So they said, look, they expressed a vague idea of proportionality. Most people don't care. Most people, when they do surveys, don't even know. I think one was like 70-80% didn't even know that this process was going on. And of course, the left's argument was, well, if the people aren't engaged, they shouldn't have their say, or they've had their chance. So the idea is we need a system where every vote counts. And to do that, we're going to have a process where literally 0.001% of the population is participating in this process. And because you didn't advertise it or tell anyone about it, literally no one even knows it's happening. But so the Conservatives and the NDP are like, look, no one really cares about this. If we're going to have a change, we should have a referendum. We should have the people either vote maybe 2 rounds of a referendum. Do you want the current electoral system changed, yes or no? Or have a couple different electoral systems on the ballot. Maybe have a threshold, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, look, this can't be left up to the government. We have to have a referendum on this. So you have 2 of the 3 major parties agreeing on this. And it turns out, I think that the head of electoral reform in Canada is actually an illegal immigrant who's not even a Canadian citizen, or not even a legal Canadian citizen. So you have some illegal Iranian immigrant running the democratic reform procedure. Figure that one out. But so they said that, and then the Liberals were like, well, there's actually this other phase of the electoral reform we were going to do, where we were going to send out postcards to everyone in Canada. And that's what I showed you. That's why I started with that. We're going to send out postcards to everyone in Canada. They're going to go online, and they're going to fill out our survey. And after they filled out our survey, we're going to tally that up, and that's going to be how we decide. So I'm not fucking kidding. This is not a joke. That postcard I showed you is not a joke. They sent out 15 million postcards to every household in Canada. What the fuck? And this is supposed to replace a referendum. This is their fucking genius idea. And stuff was coming out there's security problems. You have to give your personal information, and they can track what you voted for and what you said. I mean, this stuff is crazy. And they're saying there's security risk. People are hacking it. People are stealing personal information. As I'm going to show you in a minute, you can vote any number of times in this. There's no legal barrier to that. I'm going to use a random postal code generator in a minute. And I'm going to show you that I could vote any number of times. And the actual survey I have not looked at yet, but I've heard is complete bullshit. So this is the degree of... It's almost mind-boggling. I've been here 14 minutes trying to explain this process, and you're probably mystified because it doesn't make any sense. And this is what the left is going to do. They're going to do this until they can have their utopia, until they can have their system where they'll never lose an election. So we have to go to mydemocracy.ca, hosted by GoDaddy. So mydemocracy.ca. So that redirects me to this. Let's see, mydemocracy.ca. Thank you for engaging the conversation about strengthening our democracy. Hosted by Vox Pop Labs, Inc. Okay. I'm going to fire up my random postal code generator. And I'm going to generate me a postal code. And see if it accepts it. Let's see. Does it say anything about legality here? No, it doesn't say it's illegal to use a fake postal code. I don't see that anywhere here. So I'm just going to read through this. Have your say about our democracy. Mydemocracy.ca is an innovative way to join the national conversation on electoral reform. By answering a few questions, you can draw a picture of your democratic values, or lack thereof in my case. You can share your results with friends. It only takes a few minutes to answer, and your feedback will help help shape a healthier democracy. As you answer these questions, remember there are no wrong answers. Keep in mind that they said that, ladies and gentlemen. Your individual responses will remain anonymous, but we require your personal information. This is a different way of consulting Canadians. We hope you enjoy this and learn something too. Thanks for participating. Okay, let's see. Question 1. There should be a limit to the length of federal election campaign periods. Does that mean like the maximum? I mean, there obviously is a limit. I mean, they can't be longer than like 4 years. Do they mean like we should have fixed election dates? Should campaigns not be able to go on longer? Like, should the election have to happen a certain time after the it's called? I'm actually going to agree with this. I don't really want to do this too seriously, but I don't like campaigns that last years. It just harasses the public. Online voting in elections would increase voter participation. Like, what does this, like, this is the kind of questions they're asking. It's kind of like, and like I'm trained in this sector, you don't ask questions like this. Because this is two separate issues they put together. So so we have online voting would increase voter participation. That is a empirical question. That's not a values question. That's, do you think it would? I don't, like, is it saying you support? So what they'll probably do is if you say yes, then they'll say you want online voting. But there's lots of problems with online voting. I mean, we're screaming about how fucking Russia rigged the US election through hacking computers. And they're talking about online voting. So I'm going to say I strongly disagree. Canadians should have the option to cast their ballot online in federal elections, even if this increases the cost of elections. So this is once again kind of a non sequitur. So these are two completely separate issues. So it's should Canadians have the option to cast their ballot in federal elections? This should be its own question, and then maybe a follow-up question: would you still support this if it increased the cost? Well, it's not a well-worded question. You can't ask two questions in one question, at least not without having it as a follow-up. It's just no. A ballot should be easy to understand, even if it means voters have fewer options to express their preferences. Once again, this is a loaded question. Okay, so this is normally how I'm trained to word a question is this is how you would properly write it. Some people think that the most important aspect of a ballot is for it to be easy to understand, to reduce the chance that someone would make an error. Other people believe that it's worth it to have the ballot more complicated so that you have more options to express your preferences. That being said, which would you prefer? Like, if you're going to give it, you have to give both sides, and you have to present it in an unbiased way. Normally what you do, at least when I'm writing a question, I go, according to the Toronto Star or according to the National Post, X politician has been accused of taking money. If it was true that the person was taking money, would you be more or less would you be less likely to support this policy? Because that's not you accusing them. That's saying, look, this third party's doing it, etc. So this is horrible. Like, this is just really poorly done. Members of Parliament should always act in the interest of their constituents, even if it means going against their own party. This one's not as bad as some of the other ones. What this has to do with an electoral system, I have no idea. This doesn't. I guess I agree with that. Members of Parliament should reflect the diversity of Canadian society, even if it means putting in place special measures to increase the representation of certain groups. Once again, all of these are double barrel questions. These are two completely separate issues. Members of Parliament should reflect the diversity of Canadian society. That's a question. Even if would you still support this if it means special members to increase the representation of certain groups? It's two separate questions. You're going to get a different response for each one. Because some people might say, yeah, it should. Because, like, I know a lot of people, like center-right people, are like, yeah, I think it should represent it, but affirmative action is not the way to do it. That's not an uncommon position, so the results would be completely different, but they're rigging this. Eligible voters should not be forced to vote. That's actually not a bad question. Okay, that one, we're 1 for 1. Voters should be able to express multiple preferences on the ballot, even if this means it takes longer to count the ballots and announce the election result. Once again, two separate questions put into one. Even this means it takes longer to count the ballots and announce the election result. Okay, it should just be, should voters be able to express multiple preferences on the ballot? Question, do you agree, strongly disagree, etc. Then if it meant that it would take longer to count the ballots, would this make you more or less likely to support it? Two separate issues. Ensuring that individuals are elected from groups that are currently underrepresented in Parliament should be a top priority. We just had that question. Literally, they just asked the same question over again. The day of a federal election should be a statutory holiday. That's one of the first interesting questions. I actually kind of agree, because it's hard for a lot of people to get time off of work to vote. I mean, I normally vote ahead of time. I know people just say, oh, Argent, it's hypocritical because you don't really like democracy. Yeah, but I live in the world that I live in, not the world I wish. So I actually agree with that. There should be parties in Parliament that represent the views of all Canadians, even if some are radical or extreme. That's actually not a badly worded question. Canadians should have the opportunity to cast their vote online in federal elections, even if it's less secure. They already asked this question. Once again, it's just really poorly worded. The voting age for elections should be lowered. To what? It's just bad. It should just be like, the voting age for federal elections should be reduced to 16 is what they mean, but they won't say that. It should always be clear which party is accountable for decisions made by government, even if this means that decisions are only made by one party. What? I understand what they mean. That's just really, really poorly worded. A party that wins the most seats in an election would still have to compromise with other parties, even if that means reconsidering some of its policies. I think that means that in a proportional system, the party that won would still have to compromise to form a coalition government. Really poorly worded, though. It's better for several parties to have to govern together than for one party to make all the decisions in government, even if it takes longer for government to get things done. Once again, it's two questions they just put in one. This is horribly written. There should be greater diversity of views in Parliament. I actually agree with that. Members of Parliament should always support the position of their party, even if it means going against the wishes of their constituents. This is a reverse of a question they said earlier. I don't know. I don't really have an opinion. Eligible voters who do not vote in elections should be fined. That's actually a decent question. No, of course not. Government should have to negotiate their policy decisions with other parties in Parliament, even if it's less clear who's accountable for the resulting policy. Once again, just poorly worded. Oh boy, we have preferences now. Let's see how bad these are. A government where one party governs and can make decisions on its own, or a government where several parties have to collectively agree before a decision is made. I guess we'll go with that. Okay, that one's not horrible. Which would you prefer? One party governs and is solely accountable for policy outcomes, or several parties must cooperate to govern and they share accountability for policy outcomes? Well, that's horribly worded, but that's the same question they just asked. Ballots should be as simple as possible so that everyone understands how to vote, or ballots should allow everybody to express their preferences in detail. Once again, not a horrible one. I like simple as possible. Members of parliament that do what their party promised, even if it means going against what their constituents want. Okay. Like, this is what we just... Why couldn't this have been it? This is substantially better than the previous one. I'll just say party promised. I don't really care. What best describes your views? Should we have affirmative action? So no further action needs to be taken. Should we have affirmative action? I'm going to say no, of course. Should Canadians be allowed to cast ballots online? No. Online voting is literally the worst idea I've ever heard. Voting in federal elections is an obligation or a choice. It's a choice. Let's see here. Many small parties or a few big parties. I actually prefer many small because I want an edgy party that I can vote for. Do you want MPs to spend more time in their constituency or more time in Parliament Hill working on issues that matter to constituents? I actually think our parliaments sit for way too much time. I think it should be dramatically reduced. Because if they're just there all year, then they have to figure out something to do. So a lot of states, the people only meet a couple times a year. I'm going to say more time in their constituency. This is just a repeat what their constituents want. Please select your priorities from the list below that are most important to you. Governments that collaborate with other parties in Parliament, strengthening the link between voter intention and the election of representatives. What the fuck does that even mean? Governments that consider all viewpoints before making a decision, increasing voter turnout. Government that can easily be held account by voters. MP focus on what is best for the country. What does that even mean? Like, is there people who are like, no, the MPs, they shouldn't do what's best for the country? Ensuring the security of the voting process, implying that like people are going to say, no, the voting process shouldn't be secure. Well, Acorn would say that, but most people would not. Government with strong representation from every region. Easy to understand sounds good. I love how easy to understand is not like a de facto. Like, people are going to be like, no, it shouldn't be easy to understand. Ability to vote online. Governments can make decisions quickly. Yes. Increasing the presence of smaller parties in Parliament. Yeah, I want an edge party. Let's see here. What is your gender? Male. What is the highest level completed? They don't actually have what I have here, so I'm just going to put bachelor's. What occupation do I work in? Do they even have it? They never have what I work in. That's probably the closest. What best describes your combined household income before taxes? Let's see here. We'll just say, I don't know. We'll just be rich. Yeah, I make 300 grand a year. What is the first language that you learned? English. Generally speaking, how interested are you in politics? Very much. How frequently do you follow current national affairs daily? Oh, what the hell? Why am I trying to do this properly? Okay, I'm going to say other. I was born in 1900. I work in sales and service at the age of 100. I make over $1 million. English was the first language I learned. I daily follow politics. I am a visible minority, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, a person with a disability, and LGBTQ. Please provide a postal code. So I have a fake postal code prepared. So let's see if it lets me submit this. Oh my god, it let me submit. Okay, let's see if this works. How satisfying the way democracy works in Canada. Well, Justin Trudeau won, so not at all satisfied. How closely have you followed the public discussion on electoral reform in Canada? Not closely at all. Actually, I guess, yeah, very closely. How often have you discussed federal electoral reform with others? Not at all. I don't really care. How often do you vote in federal elections? I actually do vote every time. Oh my god, is it going to let me submit this? Yes! Let me submit my 100-year-old gay Inuit Métis. Oh my god, what a joke. So I'm a guardian. My democracy is decisive and accountable. So I guess there's guardian, idealist, rational, and artisan or whatever. Guardians tend to favor decisive governments that can take swift action and offer a clear line of accountability to voters, while they expect members of parliament to faithfully represent their constituents. Oh my god, it let me fucking submit it. I used a random postal code generator. I lied about all my personal information, and it let me submit it. And this will be used to determine the fate of the electoral system for this country. This is the level of absurdity we've reached. Well, this is Argent. I hope you found this fun. Signing